Welcome to the Red Carpet Movie Review.
And today I have my Detroit Tigers hat on, and it's only fitting because today we're going to review Detroit.
Ladies and gentlemen, live from Hollywood, California, welcome to the Red Carpet Review, starring the Showstopper, Shawn Valentino, also starring Rich Twilling. This week's special guest, supermodel Amanda Norris. Today we review Detroit, live from the red carpet.
Hey everybody, this is Shawn Valentino, your host on the Red Carpet Movie Review. My broadcast partner, Rich Twilling, is actually trying out for the Detroit Tigers right now, which is quite ironic because today we're going to be reviewing Detroit. Now, Detroit is directed by Kathryn Bigelow and it stars an ensemble cast. And Bigelow is the Oscar-winning director behind The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30. I didn't really like either of those films, so I was a little bit worried about this one. Especially because I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit and I'd heard about the Detroit riots my whole life. And this is one of the darkest moments in the history of the city, which is saying a lot because it's not like Detroit has much of a glorious history. And the details of this incident, as presented in this film, revolve around a group of racist cops that raid this motel because they suspect that a sniper had fired at a police officer from there. It's not really clear whether there actually was a sniper or whether police had just used this as an excuse to raid the hotel. And I suggest that you do some reading on this incident and the Detroit riots in general before going to see this movie, because I think it will add a lot of power and perspective to the film-going experience. But the hotel is inhabited by a group of African American teenagers who are starting a band and a couple Caucasian girls who are on vacation from Ohio. And the movie does a really good job of presenting these teens as very likable, progressive people with lots of ambition. And again, since this is taking place during the Civil Rights Movement, it shows that they want to overcome the racial tensions and limitations of the past. And once these cops enter the hotel and start torturing these innocent people, it becomes almost like a horror film. It presents some of the most terrifying tension that I've seen in a long time. This is an absolutely brilliant movie. It's packed with tension. There's an element of fear and paranoia that permeates throughout the entire viewing experience. And myself as a film goer just really felt very uncomfortable in my seat because I felt like I was with these teens getting tortured by these police officers. And knowing that this film is based on a real life incident made the film going experience even more terrifying. And once these teenagers are trapped in this hotel with these racist police officers, it becomes almost like a claustrophobic experience. And in that sense, it kind of reminded me of a totally different movie that I saw last year, and that was called Don't Breathe, which ironically also took place in one home in Detroit. And of course, that was a totally different movie. That was a horror movie, but there are similarities in that the location almost becomes like a character in itself. And Bigelow uses this location perfectly to really escalate the feeling of fear and paranoia, not only in the characters, but also in the audience as well. And in that sense, it almost reminds me of some terrific thrillers like Panic Room, where you have our heroes trapped in this frightening situation and you're just hoping that they can escape. And the entire cast in this movie is absolutely excellent. The acting is masterful. And there's really no big stars in this movie. There's no huge names that really pop off the screen. And I think that's a good thing because you and the audience can really relate to these characters on screen. And because the acting and the directing are so good, you almost forget that you're watching a movie. It almost feels like a documentary documenting these frightening events that really took place. And I want to specifically mention some of the great performances here. And one is Will Poulter, who plays the leader of this team of racist police officers. And he is absolutely magnificent in this movie. He's so unlikable. He plays a frightening character that's just poisoned with prejudice. And we in the audience, you just want to see him get his comeuppance because he's so hateable here. And this is an Oscar-worthy performance on his part. I thought he was absolutely amazing. He really does a great job of creating one of the best villains that I've ever seen in a movie. A couple other people I wanted to mention. One is John Boyega, who all of you of course recognize from the Star Wars franchise. All of us are going to be watching him in The Last Jedi later in the year. But he really does a good job here of playing this conflicted security guard who is the one African American in this movie that's kind of treated with some respect by these police officers. And you can really feel the conflict within him because he wants to help out, but at the same time he doesn't want to get caught up in the torture himself. And I thought he gives a very brilliant performance here. And I really wanted to see more of him on screen. And you also see Jason Mitchell here, who a lot of you might recognize from the NWA movie where he played Eazy-E. And I thought he gave an Oscar-worthy performance in that film. He has a smaller role here, but every scene he's absolutely excellent. And another actor I wanted to mention is Algee Smith, who I'd never seen in a movie before, but I thought he was absolutely amazing in this movie. And his character took a really fascinating arc through these horrific events. He plays one of the teenagers that's being tortured by these police officers. And I thought through his character, you really get a good psychological study on how one traumatic incident can haunt your entire life. And I thought that's really what this movie was all about, how this one horrifying incident is going to psychologically scar all of these teenagers for their entire lives. And I thought the movie does a really good job in presenting racism in a very brutal fashion where it's really in your face, but without being preachy. There's no big speeches here. The movie shows, it doesn't tell you. It showcases the horrifying effects of racism when they're ingrained into our social system and when they're abused by their authority figures. And I was an American culture major at the University of Michigan, and I was also a law school graduate. And in undergrad, I studied a lot of movies like this, and I took a lot of classes in race and American cinema. And I thought this movie did a really good job of presenting racism in a very realistic manner. And again, having gone to law school, I thought the courtroom scenes were quite riveting as well. And I found myself getting really angry in my seat because I knew this is one incident where justice would not be served. And this film does a really good job of transporting us to a very dark period of our American history when racism was ingrained into our legal system and there really wasn't a sense of justice for African Americans or minorities. And I thought the movie did a really good job of capturing the cultural consciousness and the social inequality that existed at that time. And of course, although things have gotten much better since the Civil Rights Movement, this film is still relevant to this day. And some of the inexcusable abuse of power that takes place in this movie can still be echoed in recent events that took place over the past few years. And I thought the film did a really good job of exploring the dark side of prejudice and when this prejudice is acted out upon by authority figures. And given the fact that, again, most of it takes place in one hotel, this hotel almost becomes like the set of a horror movie, like the Bates Motel from Psycho. And in this film, these officers feel no less psychotic than a Norman Bates because they've thrown all sense of reason and truth and justice and rational behavior completely out the window. And again, they've almost become like monsters themselves straight out of a horror movie. And because of their behavior, at some points in the film, you almost forget that you're watching a historical drama. And I find it interesting that the last three movies I've reviewed all took place around real-life historical events. Dunkirk revolved around the real-life Dunkirk evacuation of World War II. Atomic Blonde began with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And now this movie took place during the Detroit riots. And I thought this was the best of those three movies. And they obviously presented history in completely different ways. Dunkirk, which I thought was a very good movie, took place in a very macro sense where it focused on the entire battle and the situation itself instead of really focusing on any of the characters. And I thought that really hurt the movie. And I argued in my review that if it focused on a couple of the characters and told some of the smaller stories within the context of the Dunkirk evacuation, it would have been a much more powerful film. And of course, Atomic Blonde really took a completely different route where it ignored all sense of history, and it was really just a comic book style action movie, which is fitting because the source material was a comic book. But this movie, I thought, did a great job in not only presenting a historical event, it also presented it very cinematically by focusing on only a few characters that you can really relate to and emotionally sympathize with. So by the end of the movie, you're completely invested in the stories of these different characters, and you really want them to get justice and become successful in life. And I thought that really was part of the power of this film, is really placing you in the shoes of these teenagers who are undergoing one of the most horrific events that anyone could possibly imagine. And in that sense, it reminded me of another film that I recently watched on Netflix, and that was the Stanford Prison Experiment. And for those of you that don't know about the Stanford Prison Experiment, it was a real-life psychological study that took place at Stanford University, where a professor wanted to study the effects that being in prison would have on not only the inmates, but also on the guards. And in the study, a group of students volunteered. Some of them became guards, and others became inmates, and they kind of recreated a prison-like atmosphere within the student facility. And it was a very interesting character study because the guards suddenly became very abusive as they took on their roles, and the inmates became very submissive. And it got to the point where it was almost a dangerous situation, so they had to stop the study completely. And I thought that was really mirrored very well in this film, where you have these authority figures that really abuse their power. And of course, it doesn't help that this racism is ingrained within the societal system. And you have this group of teenagers that were presented as these vibrant, ambitious figures at the beginning of the movie. They're almost reduced to infants as they are forced to undergo this unimaginable psychological and physical torture in this Algiers Motel. So again, this is kind of similar to the Stanford Prison Experiment, except even more horrifying is that this is real life. This isn't just a psychological study that's done at a university. And watching this movie, again, you almost feel like you're undergoing the same pain because you really feel for these characters. And again, that has everything to do with great direction and just amazing acting, great performances all around, and you really feel like you're transported back in time to this real life incident at this real life location. And I just mentioned Stanford University. I think this is a movie that's going to be studied in universities for decades to come, in social science classes and movie classes as well. And like I told you, I was an American culture major in college, and I think this is a movie that we would have seen and analyzed, and I would have really enjoyed it. And I thought this was just a fascinating film. I thought they did a great job all around. And again, I thought it presented the absolutely tragic consequences that take place when racism and inequality are ingrained into our social systems. And although this is a historical drama that takes place during the Civil Rights Movement, I think it's shockingly relevant to our world today. This is quite simply one of the best pictures of the year, and it's one of those examples of a movie where everything came together. Great directing, amazing acting, excellent cinematography, a great sense of tension and atmosphere, and it's a historical drama that really does an excellent job of transporting you into this real-life historical event. So in that sense, I highly recommend this movie. We here at the Red Carpet Review like to review our movies on a 5-star scale, and I wanted to give Detroit 4.5 stars on a 5-star scale. Again, go check this movie out. It's a good escape from the usual summer popcorn movies that are generally very mindless. This is a very intelligent movie that's going to force you to think, and it's going to really generate a lot of great conversations afterwards. So thank you so much for watching. Be sure to click that like button and press subscribe, and we'll see you next week on the red carpet. So we brought one of our beautiful models here straight out of Detroit. And what do you feel about this red carpet review of Detroit?
Exactly.
There you have it, folks. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to click that like button and press subscribe, and we'll see you next week on the red carpet.
Thank you for watching the Red Carpet Review. Proceed to click that like button and press subscribe for weekly movie reviews past and present. We'll see you soon on the red carpet.